I'm speaking with Theodore Solotaroff, who is the editor of the New American Review. Well, it's number 12 has recently been published. Number 13 is in the works. It has established some longevity already. What is it, Mr. Solotaroff?
Well, it's a paperback magazine. That is to say, it comes out in the form of a one of those paperbacks you see in the on the book racks.
But there's some continuity to it.
Oh yeah, it's well, mainly its continuity is provided by the kind of material it publishes, which is literary, though indeed there's been a great deal of political and social commentary in the magazine. We live in a time in which such commentary is inevitable and indispensable.
So it's a kind of anthology. It's a kind of periodical.
Yeah, I don't like the idea of an anthology, though people keep using that word, because an anthology seems to me almost a kind of miscellany or something that's assembled from previously published materials. Everything in NAR, first of all, is original. And moreover...
NAR, New American Review. Let's fix that firmly in our minds before we go any further.
And it's also edited with a certain kind of ongoing intention or perspective that gives it its coherence or continuity, coherence within a given issue and continuity from issue to issue.
And these are all American writers you publish?
Yeah, for the most part, I would say so. Though we've published a fair number of Canadian writers.
Well, you call it the New American Review, and I get the impression you're talking about North America.
Yeah, though it would be disingenuous of me to say that we're really publishing North American writing, and it's only an accent. There have only been a few Canadian writers in it. We received very few contributions from Canadian writers, which I think is a pity, because I would love to publish more. And indeed, some of the notable things I've published in New American Review have come from Canada. To wit, a marvelous chapter from Mordecai Richler's novel
St. Urbain's Horseman, which
right,
you were the first to have that, weren't you?
Yeah, I published something called A Dinner with Ormsby Fletcher, which was a very, very funny.
Riotously funny.
And
it almost came off better in your anthology somehow than it did in the novel.
You mean that section?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to say. Mordecai's a friend, you know.
But in any case, you do make an effort to get Canadians in, although not a proper representation.
Yeah, it's hard if you don't really have that many contacts with Canadian writers to solicit material. The writers whom I have been publishing from Canada, such as Neil Compton, who did several very good things for us, particularly an essay on Marshall McLuhan in NAR2, which I think is one of the important essays that's been written on McLuhan. But that was a relationship that I had before I started, and though NAR is reviewed quite widely in Canada, and though we have a fair number of subscribers from Canada, I don't really get that many submissions from Canada.
Well, maybe you should call it a New American English Review, since there, of course, is a large body of people writing very well in North America in French.
Yeah, that's true, but I suppose it's our terrible American provincialism and insularity which makes us not quite conscious of how much writing is done by our neighbors to the north.
What's the track record of NAR? Now you've changed publishers at least once.
Yeah, we changed publishers after number 10. New American Library originally published it, which also is the reason it's called New American Review, because its sponsor was New American Library.
Did you lose your shirt or what?
Well, yes and no. No for the first several issues, and then, a couple of sleeves, in the later issues. It's a little magazine that's published in very large quantities. In other words, at New American Library, which was a mass market reprint house, they would do 100 to 150,000 copies of each issue. Now, almost all those issues would have to be sold in the newsstand, in the bookstores and newsstands and supermarkets and tobacco shops and so on, where paperback books are sold. And since the quality of the writing is high and serious and so on, you had to have something
you had to move a lot of books, a high number.
Yeah, and if you had something like Portnoy's Complaint, as we did in number 1 and 3, or Sexual Politics in number 7, which
Kate
was
Millett.
Kate Millett, which was a very big attention getter. Then you would probably come out fairly well. But unless you had some sort of spectacular talk piece, as it's called, that everyone talks about, it became harder and harder to do that. See, most magazines rely mostly on subscriptions.
Mm-hmm. So what decided you to move, and what good was the move?
Well, I decided to move partly because I was asked to. A New American Library decided they'd go on about as far as they could with it, and then I began looking around for another publisher to take it on, and the one that presented themselves was Simon & Schuster, where I am now. The difference is that Simon & Schuster is not a mass market house. They're called a trade publisher. In other words, they sell their books in bookstores. Instead of printing 100,000, we now print 50,000. And instead of distributing them to, all those other outlets, secondary outlets.
And the difference in price, now it's $1.95.
Yeah, partly because we do...
What was it before?
It started at 95 cents and eventually was up to $1.50. Mm-hmm. And obviously, the larger the volume you do, the smaller the unit cost.
So you really work for Simon & Schuster. You're a salaried person. You're an editor.
Yeah, I'm also a senior editor of Simon & Schuster and do books there. Moreover, one of the advantages that I have now is that material that comes to me through New American Review that has potential as a book, I can use and develop for Simon & Schuster, whereas New American Library, which was almost entirely a reprint house, you would first have to get a hardcover publisher to publish it before they could then reprint it. Yeah. And since most of the writing that I see and the writers that I publish are writers who are sort of arriving rather than the big, better-known names, there's not terribly much mass market interest in them, at least at the outset.
Now, you mentioned a moment ago that you did publish an early excerpt from Portnoy's Complaint. Mm-hmm. Now, that certainly was a talk piece, to use your language. Yeah, would you say that was the greatest success, publishing success you've had so far?
I suppose that it probably attracted more attention than any other single essay. But, an editor is like a father and has all these children and would hate to have to, say that this one is the best. I did publish quite a marvelous story of his in number 10, an old sort of radio story.
About Albert Einstein.
About Albert Einstein, about the man who wants to put Albert Einstein on the air as the Jewish answer to the Answer Man. And that came to me. Though I have no particular priority, or no particular, hold on Roth, and indeed several of the things that I've published went to other magazines before they came to me.
Well, given the success of New American Review, Mr. Solotaroff, and given the paucity of serious literary magazines that have any circulation at all, you must get a great many manuscripts. How do you decide what to read?
Well, it's always an interesting question to try to answer. We get about 200 manuscripts a week, or 10,000 a year. Obviously, if I were to sit down and read every page of every one of those manuscripts, I would, do nothing else, in fact, including sleep.
One reviewer commented that it seemed to him that you do most of your reading in bed.
No, the reason that I look so tired is because...
No, he didn't mean your personal appearance. He meant the kind of piece that you chose to publish.
Yeah, well, I've been meaning to ask him about that, and what he had in mind. I guess he was saying that my attitude toward NAR is more relaxed than I guess, Philip Roth's of Partisan Review, whom he compared me to. And I am fairly relaxed in the sense that I try to be as, if the word is, as passive in a kind of active way or in an intelligent way as I can. In other words, I don't try to over-edit the magazine. I don't try to set it up as advancing one kind of prose or poetry or one group of writers or one political position, but rather try to make it as responsive as possible to what is happening among writers.
How do you select when you've got these 10,000 manuscripts?
Well, first of all, you do an initial screening, and I must say that my associate does it, I don't, in which you can pretty well discard 60 to 70% of that material as just not for NAR. Either it's not up to our standards, or else it's very familiar. It looks like a New Yorker story, or Playboy or something like that. Could be quite good, but it's just not quite what we're interested in. Then of the other 30%, that gets read. I read it. And this also includes material from agents. and then if anything that I read, I then send around to the 3 or 4 people who are on the editorial board, who are also Simon & Schuster editors, and they read it, and then we get together and talk about it.
You don't have complete say here, then?
Well, I do, to the extent that that I won't publish something that I don't really respond to. I won't publish a poem I don't understand. I won't publish a story that leaves me totally bored, even though my colleagues say this is terrific or so on.
So you have veto power.
I have veto power, yeah. And look, as kind of egalitarian and democratic and so on as I make it, still an editor does finally impose his own standards and attitudes and so on a magazine. If he doesn't, it doesn't have any character. It doesn't have any identity.
One of the unusual pieces in the current issue, which has been called the best of the lot so far, is the opening, what shall I call it, piece. The opening piece by A. Alvarez, which is a memoir about Sylvia Plath. Really extraordinary, because Mr. Alvarez just happened to be on the scene when the poet Sylvia Plath was in the last part of her life, a very productive part of her life, when she compared her outpouring of poetry to the flowing of blood. How did you get Alvarez's piece?
It's unusual to the extent that it's by an English writer, and there's not very much of that in NAR. No, I got it. I was in Amsterdam about this time last year, and he had one of those international literary talk fests, and Alvarez was there too. And in the course of drinking or what have you, I asked him what he was up to, and he said he'd just finished an essay on Sylvia Plath. And I knew that he had known her and had been one of her early, supporters. And so I said, I'd love to see it. And he said, well, I do need quite a lot of money, and it's been, I think my agent, who was an American agent, had it at the New Yorker. And he said, if they turn it down, by all means. And so when I came back, I called his agent. She said, well, the New Yorker had turned it down, and she'd sent it to another magazine, which I won't mention.
You'll mention the New Yorker, but you won't mention another one.
Well, because the New Yorker simply turned it down, whereas the other magazine, I think you'll see why I don't want to mention it. And they liked it very much, but it ran something like 42 manuscript pages, 12,000 words, and they asked him if he wouldn't mind cutting, 2,000 words. And he didn't want to, and then when this was told to me, I said, well, look, I realize that this is written with your heart's blood, as indeed it is. That's why it's as powerful and intimate as it is. And and I'm not going to try to amputate it. If I buy it, I would buy the whole thing. So he said, well, then why don't you read it? And I did and bought it, and so that's how I got it.
Now, you also have a piece in number 12 by Donald Barthelme. Now, Donald Barthelme is a contract writer with the New Yorker, which means that they have the first refusal on his stuff. But he has some obscene scatological words in this particular piece, which is contrary to the style of the New Yorker. So I guess that's how you got your hands on it.
I would suppose so. I've published 2 things by Barthelme. This one, which is...
Barthelme, by the way, has been on this program, Anthology, before.
Yeah, this story, which is about 2 very high-class Catholic lesbians, I would imagine was a problem to the New Yorker. But the other thing of his I've published, which was very, very successful, was a quite marvelous little story called Robert Kennedy Saved from Drowning, back in NAR 3.
Which is really a misleading title.
Yeah.
Purposely, I guess, but if that was a talk piece, it was a talk piece because of the title.
Yeah, but no, I thought it was a very illuminating, kind of mysterious way of getting that man created by publicity and journalism and so on, into the context of his, or seeing him as both a person and as a public figure, and a kind of shuttling between the two, of sort of writing about him in the most intimate parts of his life in this very journalistic way, and showing in a way how a public figure becomes, almost made out of paper.
But can you compete financially with some rich publication like the New Yorker?
Of course not.
No, you can't. Now, but you do have in this number 12 an article by Norman Mailer. Now, Norman Mailer's famous for making scads of money for his pieces. Now, how did you get that one? This is a course in filmmaking, he calls it.
Thereby hangs a very complex tale, which would take the rest of our time to tell.
Well, you have 20 seconds.
Well, I got it because the one or two very large paying magazines that he had given it to turned it down, and so it came my way. The thing that the advantage I have is though I don't.
Let's talk. Can we talk about money? How much can you afford for say 30 or 40?
Well, it tends to vary somewhat depending on what I must pay in some cases. It ranges somewhere between 6 and 10 cents a word, so that a very long essay might be paid $1,000 to $1,500, but that's about as high as I can go. Most of the material in here, the average length story or essay, is $300, $400 at most.
Nobody's going to make a living working for New American Review except you.
And I only in part. But the advantage that I do have, which is a very powerful one, is length, space. In other words, that there's something as long as the chapter Civilization and Discontents, or Alvarez's essay, or... See, there's 256 pages of type here, and no ads. It's all copy. It's all writing.
Well,
so
I can't let you get away with that. There is an ad for Simon & Schuster in there.
For an AR. Yeah. Well, to be sure. But otherwise, it's, that's all it is. And so a 12,000-word essay is very easily for me to accommodate, whereas New Yorker or Playboy, it's not.
Now, I've heard that you'd never make assignments, that you're passive in that respect. Now, why is that?
Well, it's not quite true. I do occasionally...
You talked about liking journalism and the new kind of political reporting. Certainly that leads naturally to assignments.
Sure it does. Except to the extent that I don't specify things. Now and then I will do this, but as a rule, I will not say to Norman Mailer, hey, why don't you write an essay on film, making a film? Or to Stanley Kaufman, why don't you write an essay on your experience as drama critic of the New York Times? Or Neil Compton, why don't you write an essay on McLuhan? Or Mordecai Richler, why don't you write an essay on your experience in Paris in the 50s? What I do instead is to say, look, I'm very interested in you, in your writing. Is there any subject that you really have on your mind or have had on your mind that you wanted to write about? No one's asked you to, and you're not that sure of it yourself, and it's risky, or, that I'm very interested in. You tell me, what's urgent for you to write about. So I do it that way, letting the writer call the shot, because if I say to whoever it is, do this on this subject, the chances are he has some time, or he needs the money, or he wants to be in an AR, and you ask for a commission piece, and that's what you get. Something that he does, because it's been asked of him to do.
But this is also a dodge for you because it permits you to escape putting money on the line before you see it.
Yes and no. I mean, if someone so says, Mordecai Richler says, yes, I'd love to do something on setting up as a writer in Paris in the 50s, then I say, fine, that's a commission.
Yes.
And if I don't publish it, I still have to pay him whatever the commission fee is. You see.
Now, it has often been said about New American Review in the 4 years of its existence that it is a highly personally edited thing by Theodore Solotaroff. What is going to happen to this New American Review when you, through choice or some other circumstance, no longer are at the helm?
Well, I would hope something good would happen to it, namely another editor who would have this very strong personal commitment to it than I do, and who would create a somewhat different magazine. Edmund Wilson once said that the average life of a magazine is about 5 years. And what he meant by that is not, of course, that they will die after 5 years, but that the original impulse of energy and perspective and so on tends to peter out over a period of 5 years. The magazine can go on, but it probably should have someone else at the helm who will, bring a new and fresher, who will go into areas that I don't go into simply because I don't go into them. I don't know about them, or I'm not interested in them, or what have you.
Do you see this as coming up?
Well, 5 years.
One more year.
I have one more year to go. No.
What else would you like to do?
Well, I'm a writer myself, and I'm doing less and less of my own work, and I suppose eventually I'm going to reach a critical point where I'll have to, decide, if I'm really going to. But when you get to be in your early 40s, you realize, that the future is not unlimited. You only have so many more years, and I'm writing an autobiography now, without very much time to write it, and I suppose that in time I will hand the reins of NAR on to someone else and do my own work.
But how difficult it is to make a go as a freelance writer, as you as an editor must realize
it's
more than anyone.
It's terrible. I think that one of the reasons that there's so much good writing being done now is that many writers have been freed by teaching to really write what they want to write, rather than having to hack out a living from, journalism and what have you. And I suppose when I leave publishing, I'll go back to teaching myself. Yeah.
But it would be a good thing, don't you agree, if a magazine or anthology or a periodical or whatever you want to call it could afford to pay a man for a 10,000-word article for the length of time it took him to research and write it, or to think about it and write it.
Sure it would. But, the problem is, of course, that if he's going to be paid those kind of fees, he's probably going to have to appear in a magazine that's very top-heavy with advertising, and which the ratio of print to advertising is probably no better than 50-50. This means, in turn, that he's going to have a much more limited amount of space at his disposal than he would in something like NAR. And so you'll probably find that the material, say, in Esquire, Playboy, New Yorker, which is a little different, though, but the Harper's, Atlantic, tends to run much shorter than an NAR. And the reason is, of course, that they have these tremendous demands on their space by the need to publish enough advertising to foot the bills and pay those fees. Moreover, the larger you cast your net for readers and so on, the more kind of miscellaneous or promiscuous, you might say, the magazine becomes. I know a number of writers have told me they love to be in NAR because there they really feel among their peers. Whereas in some of the other magazines, which pay a lot more, they still find themselves, in very strange company, and it makes a difference.
Thank you very much, sir. Theodore Solotaroff, the editor of New American Review, number 12 is out, 13 is in the works. This is Stephen Banker in New York.